The vast cornfield swayed gently in the afternoon breeze as Marcus Reynolds worked his land, appearing to be nothing more than a simple farmer tending to his crops in the remote hills of Montana. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. But beneath his weathered hands and sun-worn face lay a deadly secret. This humble farmer was actually a retired Green Beret sniper, one of the most lethal marksmen ever to serve in U.S. Special Forces. The Mexican cartel members advancing through his fields had no idea they were about to make the biggest mistake of their lives. The late summer sun beat down mercilessly on Marcus's broad shoulders as he methodically inspected the irrigation lines running through his cornfield. At 52, his tall frame still carried the strength and discipline from his military days, though most people just saw a hardworking farmer who kept to himself. The isolation of his 200-acre farm suited him perfectly, providing the peace and quiet he had craved after 2 decades of combat deployments and covert operations around the world. Marcus had chosen this particular plot of land carefully when he retired 5 years ago. The rolling terrain offered excellent sight lines in all directions, and the elevated position of his farmhouse gave him a tactical advantage he hoped he'd never need to use. Old habits died hard, and 20 years in Special Forces had ingrained in him a constant awareness of his surroundings that never fully went away. That awareness suddenly sparked to life as Marcus noticed something odd about the way his crops were moving. The corn stalks at the far edge of his field swayed against the wind, betraying movement that couldn't be natural. His eyes narrowed as he spotted several dark figures moving through the rows, trying to stay concealed but clearly unfamiliar with proper tactical movement through vegetation. Marcus didn't rush or panic. He continued his work on the irrigation line, but his mind was already calculating distances and angles, taking stock of his options. The nearest neighbor was 5 miles away, and cell service was spotty at best out here. He was on his own, just as he had been on countless missions before. His hand brushed against the concealed handgun he always carried, another habit he'd never abandoned. The intruders were being cautious, but sloppy. Marcus counted at least 6 distinct movement patterns through his crops, and their spacing was too tight for proper field operations. These weren't military or law enforcement. Their lack of proper tactical training was obvious to his experienced eye. As they drew closer, he caught glimpses of their weapons, a mix of AK variants and AR-15s, carried with the casual confidence of men who relied on firepower over skill. Marcus knew exactly who they were. The cartels had been pushing north, expanding their operations into Montana's remote regions. He'd heard rumors at the local diner about other farmers being pressured to allow their land to be used for drug trafficking. Some had been threatened, others bought out. A few had simply disappeared. Now they had come for his land, probably, assuming he would be an easy target, just another isolated farmer they could intimidate or eliminate. A grim smile crossed Marcus's weathered face. They had no idea who they were dealing with. As a Green Beret sniper, he had spent years perfecting the art of remaining invisible while hunting some of the world's most dangerous targets. The cartel members currently attempting to sneak up on him were amateurs in comparison, telegraphing their movements to anyone with trained eyes. Marcus straightened up slowly, stretching his back as if tired from his work. In reality, he was checking his sight lines and mentally marking possible firing positions. The farmhouse was 400 yards away, an easy shot with his custom .338 Lapua Magnum rifle that sat ready in his gun safe. Between here and there were several potential cover positions: the old tractor shed, the irrigation pump house, and natural depressions in the land that he had specifically maintained for their tactical value. The cartel members were now close, enough that Marcus could hear their hushed voices speaking rapid Spanish. His years of operating in Central and South America had made him fluent in the language, and he picked up enough to confirm his suspicions. They weren't here to negotiate. The words kill, example, and territory told him everything he needed to know about their intentions. Marcus's pulse remained steady as he assessed his situation. The sun was at his back, giving him an advantage, as the intruders would have to squint to look in his direction. The wind was light and consistent, perfect conditions for precision shooting if it came to that. But first, He would wait and gather intelligence. His training had taught him that patience and information were often more valuable than quick action. The leader of the group emerged from the corn rows first, a tall man with a scarred face and a tactical vest that had seen better days. He carried himself with the arrogance of someone used to intimidating civilians, but Marcus recognized the look in his eyes. This was a man who had killed before and wouldn't hesitate to do so again. The cartel member's hand rested casually on his holstered pistol as he approached, clearly expecting this to be a routine operation of terrorizing a simple farmer. That assumption was about to cost them dearly. Marcus kept his posture relaxed and unthreatening as the cartel members surrounded him in a loose semicircle. His mind, however, was already mapping out his response. The irrigation pipe in his hands could become a weapon in seconds. His concealed handgun was accessible with one smooth motion. But for now, he would play the role they expected. Just another scared farmer about to be strong-armed by the cartel. "Beautiful farm you have here," the scarred leader said in heavily accented English, his tone carrying a mock friendliness that didn't reach his eyes. "Very isolated, very vulnerable." He gestured broadly at the surrounding cornfields, as if admiring the view. "My name is Ramon. We're here to make you a business proposition." Marcus recognized the calculated intimidation tactics. He had seen them used countless times during his deployments. The false courtesy, the implied threats, the gradual escalation of pressure. He had even trained foreign military units in psychological warfare techniques similar to these. The irony wasn't lost on him. "I'm not interested in any business propositions," Marcus replied evenly, his voice carrying the simple drawl of a Montana farmer. "This land's been in my family for generations." It was a lie. He had bought the property specifically for its tactical advantages, but it was the kind of thing a real farmer would say. Ramon's friendly facade cracked slightly. "I don't think you understand, friend. This isn't a request." He snapped his fingers and his men raised their weapons. "We're going to use your farm whether you agree or not. The only question is whether you'll be alive to see it." Marcus noticed every detail as the situation escalated. 2 men on his left, 3 on his right, all within 15 meters. The 6th man had disappeared, probably circling behind him. Their weapons were well maintained, but their stances were sloppy. They held their rifles too high, too tight. None of them had their fingers properly indexed along the receiver. They were killers, yes, but untrained ones. "Before you make your next move," Marcus said calmly, "you should know that I'm giving you one chance to leave. After that, things get complicated." His voice had changed subtly, the farmer's drawl replaced by something harder, more commanding. Ramon laughed, the sound echoing across the cornfield. "You think you're in a position to make threats? Look around you, old man. You're surrounded, outnumbered, and in about 10 seconds you're going to be dead unless you start being very cooperative." Marcus sighed. They never took the warning. In all his years of operations, the targets never recognized the danger until it was too late. His fingers tightened almost imperceptibly on the irrigation pipe as he detected movement behind him. The 6th man making his move. "Last chance," Marcus said quietly. "Walk away." Ramon's face twisted into a snarl. He raised his hand to signal the kill order, but Marcus was already moving. 20 years of Special Forces training exploded into action with lethal precision. He spun leftward, swinging the irrigation pipe in a savage arc that caught the nearest cartel member across the face. Before the man hit the ground, Marcus had already drawn his concealed handgun. 2 rapid shots dropped the men on his right with mechanical precision, one in the shoulder, one in the leg. Non-lethal shots, but decisively incapacitating. The man behind him fired, but Marcus had already dropped to one knee. The bullets whizzed harmlessly overhead as Marcus pivoted, his handgun barking twice more. The flanker went down hard, clutching his shooting hand, his weapon clattering away. Ramon and his remaining man stumbled backward, shocked by the sudden violence and precision of Marcus's response. Their weapons came up, but they were too slow, too clumsy. Marcus's 5th shot knocked the rifle from the subordinate's hands, while his 6th caught Ramon in the meat of his thigh, dropping him to the ground. In less than 5 seconds, all 6 cartel members were down, None dead, but all efficiently neutralized. Marcus stood calmly, his weapon trained on Ramon as the cartel leader clutched his bleeding leg. What? What are you? Ramon gasped, his face pale with shock and pain. I tried to warn you, Marcus replied, his voice cold. I'm not just a farmer. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. And this isn't my first gunfight. He kept his distance, knowing that wounded enemies were often the most dangerous. I spent 20 years in Special Forces as a Green Beret sniper. The last thing you want is to force me to draw on those skills. Ramon's eyes widened with recognition and fear. The cartel had extensive intelligence networks. They knew what Green Berets were capable of. This is a mistake, he stammered. We didn't know. Now you do. Marcus cut him off. So here's what happens next. You're going to call whoever's waiting to hear from you. You're going to tell them this territory is off limits, because if anyone comes back. He let the threat hang in the air, unfinished, but clear. A groan from one of the wounded men broke the tension. Marcus knew he needed to act fast. There could be more cartel members nearby, and the gunshots would have carried across the open fields. This was just the beginning. The cartel wouldn't take this humiliation lightly, and he needed to prepare for their response. Marcus worked quickly and methodically, disarming the wounded cartel members and using zip ties from his work belt to secure them. His movements were precise and efficient, the result of countless similar operations during his military career. As he worked, his mind was already racing ahead, analyzing potential scenarios and planning his next moves. Your men need medical attention, Marcus said to Ramon, his voice steady and professional. I'm going to call this in to the county sheriff, but before I do, you're going to make that call I mentioned, and you're going to make it convincing. He tightened the zip tie around Ramon's wrists, firm but not cruel. Because if you don't, the next time your cartel friends come around, I won't be using non-lethal shots. Ramon's face was pale from blood loss, but his eyes still burned with hatred. You don't understand what you're dealing with, he spat. The cartel doesn't forgive, they don't forget. When they hear about this, they'll hear exactly what you tell them, Marcus interrupted, pressing Ramon's own phone into his hand. Make the call. As Ramon reluctantly dialed with shaking fingers, Marcus's trained ears caught a sound that made his heart rate spike, the distant whop-whop-whop of helicopter rotors. His eyes narrowed as he scanned the horizon. The sound was too heavy for a news or police chopper. This was something bigger. Your backup is already here, isn't it? Marcus asked, though he already knew the answer. Ramon's slight smirk confirmed it. The cartel had planned this thoroughly. They had air support ready to respond if anything went wrong. They weren't just pushing into new territory, they were launching a full-scale operation. Marcus's tactical mind shifted into high gear. The farmhouse was too exposed to be defended against an aerial assault. The cornfields offered concealment, but no real cover. He needed somewhere with better defensive positions and fewer approaches. His eyes landed on the old barn at the edge of his property, its weathered wood hiding reinforced concrete walls, and a basement he'd specifically modified for situations like this. Change of plans, Marcus said, hauling Ramon to his feet. We're moving. All of you. Up. Anyone who can walk helps those who can't. The other cartel members struggled to their feet, supporting their more seriously wounded companions. Marcus kept his weapon ready as he guided them toward the barn, his eyes constantly scanning the sky. The helicopter was getting closer. Based on the sound, Marcus estimated it was a Bell 412, commonly used by cartels for rapid deployment of heavily armed teams. If he was right, they had about 3 minutes before it arrived, and it would be carrying at least 8 more cartel gunmen. Inside the barn, Marcus quickly moved his prisoners to the basement. The space was sparse but secure, with reinforced doors and walls that could withstand small arms fire. He had built it as a last resort shelter, and now it would serve its purpose. You're trapped in here with us, Ramon sneered as Marcus secured the basement door. When our men arrive, you still don't understand what you're dealing with, Marcus cut him off. I chose this farm for its defensive capabilities. That helicopter, I've shot them down before. Those men they're sending, I've trained against. Better. He checked his watch. Now shut up. I have work to do. Moving swiftly, Marcus accessed a hidden compartment in the barn wall, revealing his arsenal. The custom 338 Lapua Magnum rifle came out first, his old friend from countless missions. Next came his combat vest, loaded with magazines and equipment. Within 60 seconds, he had transformed from farmer to warrior. The helicopter was now visible on the horizon, a dark shape against the late afternoon sky. Marcus moved to the barn's upper level, where concealed firing ports gave him clear lines of sight across his property. He set up his rifle, performing the same pre-shot routine that had served him through hundreds of precision engagements. Through his scope, he could see the helicopter's approach pattern. They were coming in fast and low, using the terrain to mask their arrival. It was a good tactic against amateur opponents. Against a trained sniper, it was a fatal mistake. The low altitude would limit their ability to maneuver, and the pilot would be focused on the terrain rather than scanning for threats. Marcus removed the lens caps from his scope and adjusted for wind and distance. The mathematics of long-range shooting came back to him instantly. Temperature, humidity, barrel heat, spin drift. His breath slowed as he settled into his shooting position, becoming one with his weapon. The helicopter was now 800 meters out and descending toward his cornfield. Through his scope, Marcus could see armed men preparing to fast rope down. They were well equipped but bunched too close together. One good shot would throw their entire operation into chaos. Marcus's finger rested lightly on the trigger as he tracked the helicopter's movement. He didn't want to kill anyone unnecessarily, but he needed to send a clear message. The cartel had to learn that some targets weren't worth pursuing. His crosshairs settled on the helicopter's tail rotor, a shot that would force them down without causing a catastrophic crash. Time to remind them why Green Berets are feared, Marcus whispered to himself as he prepared to take the shot that would change everything. Marcus exhaled slowly, his finger applying steady pressure to the trigger. The helicopter's tail rotor filled his scope, the blade assembly rotating in a deadly blur. At this distance, he had to account for multiple variables: wind speed, temperature, the rotation of the Earth itself. But these calculations were as natural as breathing to him now, ingrained through thousands of hours behind a rifle. The shot broke clean, the suppressed rifle barely disturbing the stillness of the barn. Through his scope, Marcus watched the 338 Lapua round strike exactly where he intended. The tail rotor erupted in a shower of sparks and metal fragments, the assembly coming apart in a catastrophic but controlled failure. The helicopter immediately began to spin, its pilot fighting desperately for control. The cartel gunmen who had been preparing to fast rope down were thrown against the cabin walls, their carefully planned insertion turning into chaos. The pilot managed to arrest the spin enough to attempt an emergency landing in the cornfield, but the touchdown was hard, crushing several rows of corn as the aircraft skidded to a stop. First problem solved, Marcus muttered, already shifting his position. He knew what would come next. The cartel men would deploy from the downed helicopter, angry and looking for revenge, but they would be disorganized, rattled by the crash. It was exactly what he had planned for. Through his scope, he counted 8 men emerging from the helicopter, plus the pilot and co-pilot. They moved with the aggression of experienced gunmen, but lacked the discipline of proper military training. Their formation was sloppy, bunched too close together as they tried to orient themselves in the cornfield. Marcus could have easily killed them all from his position. The shots would have been challenging but well within his capabilities. However, his Green Beret training had taught him that sometimes the best weapon was fear itself. He needed to break their will to fight, not just their ability to do so. His second shot struck the ground at the feet of their apparent leader, sending up a spray of dirt and making the man jump back. The third round punched through an assault rifle, rendering it useless without harming the man carrying it. The fourth shot shattered a tactical radio on another man's vest. Each shot was precisely placed to demonstrate his absolute control over the situation. The cartel members scattered, diving for cover in the corn rows. They fired wildly toward the barn, but their shots fell hopelessly short or went wide. They couldn't see him, couldn't effectively return fire, and most importantly, couldn't advance without exposing themselves to his devastating accuracy. "Keep shooting," One of them shouted in Spanish. "We have to suppress him." Marcus allowed himself a grim smile. They still didn't understand. He had chosen every aspect of this battlefield, from the elevated position of the barn to the carefully maintained fields that eliminated any effective cover within his firing range. Their only options were to retreat or die. He put another round into the helicopter's engine compartment, ensuring it wouldn't fly again. Then he began methodically destroying their vehicle's engines. They had arrived in 3 SUVs parked at the edge of his property. One by one, the vehicle's engine blocks erupted in sprays of oil and metal as his rounds found their marks. The cartel members were now truly trapped, with no transportation and no way to advance. Their radio calls for backup went unanswered. Marcus had chosen this farm partly for its location in a cellular dead zone, and he had already taken out their tactical radios. "Listen carefully," Marcus called out in perfect Spanish, his voice carrying across the field. "I've deliberately avoided killing any of you so far. That can change in the next 30 seconds, or you can surrender. Your choice." To emphasize his point, he fired again, the round cutting through a man's tactical vest shoulder strap without touching his skin. The display of precision marksmanship sent a clear message. He could kill them at will, but was choosing not to. There was a long moment of tense silence, broken only by the ticking of the helicopter's cooling engine. Then, one by one, weapons began hitting the ground. The cartel members stood slowly, hands raised. Even hardened killers knew when they were outmatched. "Walk forward slowly," Marcus commanded, keeping them in his scope. "Anyone who runs dies. Anyone who reaches for a weapon dies. Consider this your only warning." As they complied, moving awkwardly through the corn rows with their hands up, Marcus activated a small radio of his own, a secure line to a very specific contact. "Sierra 3, this is Whiskey 6. Remember that favor you owe me? Time to collect. I've got some garbage that needs disposal at my farm. Bring a big truck and some cuffs." The response was immediate. "Copy that, Whiskey 6. Tactical team is 20 minutes out. Hold your position." Marcus allowed himself to relax slightly, but not completely. The immediate threat was neutralized, but he knew this wasn't over. The cartel would respond to this humiliation with everything they had. They would send their best killers, their most ruthless operators, and when they did, he would be ready. As the sun began to set over the Montana landscape, Marcus maintained his vigilant watch through his rifle scope. The captured cartel members were secured in his reinforced basement, and his old military contact's tactical team was en route. But years of experience had taught him that the most dangerous moment often came after an apparent victory. In the basement, Ramon had fallen unusually quiet, his earlier bravado replaced by a knowing smile that set Marcus's instincts on edge. 20 years in special forces had taught him to read people, and Ramon's expression spoke volumes. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. "Something you want to share, Ramon?" Marcus asked, his voice carrying an edge of steel. The cartel leader looked up, his eyes glinting in the dim light. "You think you've won? This was just the advance team. El Coyote himself will come from you now. He doesn't tolerate failure, and he definitely doesn't tolerate humiliation." Marcus had heard that name before. El Coyote was a legend in the cartel world, a former Mexican special forces operator who had turned his military training to drug running and assassination. He was known for his tactical expertise and absolute ruthlessness. "Good," Marcus replied, calmly checking his watch. "I was worried this might be too easy." A sound caught his attention, the faint but distinct whir of drone rotors. Marcus moved swiftly to the barn's upper level, scanning the darkening sky through his night vision optics. There, at the edge of his property, he spotted them. 3 small reconnaissance drones, their infrared cameras sweeping the area. "Smart," Marcus muttered. El Coyote was already moving, using modern tactics to map the battlefield before committing his forces. The drones were probably feeding real-time intel to a tactical team waiting nearby. Marcus quickly formulated a plan. He could shoot down the drones, but that would only confirm his position. Instead, he activated a small device on his tactical vest, a military-grade infrared beacon that would flood the drone's thermal cameras, effectively blinding them. His radio crackled. Whiskey 6, this is Sierra 3. We're 10 minutes out, but we're picking up multiple vehicles approaching from the south. Big heat signatures, heavily armed. Copy that, Marcus responded. Be advised, situation is hot. Hold position at checkpoint, Charlie. I'll call when it's clear. He knew better than to risk his friend's tactical team against what was coming. This fight needed to be handled his way. Marcus moved quickly through his barn, activating pre-positioned defense measures he'd installed years ago. Motion sensors came online, covering every approach to the property. Small charges, non-lethal but effective, were armed at key choke points. He wasn't just a sniper. The Green Berets had trained him in total battlefield control. Through his thermal scope, he spotted the first wave of El Coyote's men advancing through the cornfields. Their movement patterns were different from the earlier team. Disciplined, professional, using proper tactical spacing. These were trained killers, not common thugs. Marcus counted 12 men in the initial assault team, moving in a classic pincer formation. They were good, but they were still making a crucial mistake. They assumed they were hunting a farmer who got lucky against their B team. They didn't realize they were walking into an ambush planned by someone with more combat experience than their entire team combined. The first trap triggered at the edge of the cornfield, a series of powerful floodlights suddenly illuminating the approaching team, destroying their night vision and throwing them into confusion. Marcus had positioned the lights months ago, disguised as ordinary farm equipment. Before they could recover, he began his counterattack. His first shot struck the team leader's night vision goggles, shattering them without causing injury. His second shot disabled the barrel of an M4 carbine, rendering it useless. Each shot was precisely calculated to demonstrate his absolute control over the battlefield. "Fall back!" someone shouted in Spanish, but it was too late. Marcus had already begun his next phase, triggering a series of smoke charges that filled the cornfield with thick white smoke. Through his thermal scope, he watched the team's formation break down as they lost visual contact with each other. More vehicles were arriving at the edge of his property, reinforcements responding to the team's distress calls. Marcus spotted a familiar figure emerging from an armored SUV, a tall, lean man with a distinctive gait that spoke of military training. El Coyote himself had arrived. "So, the legend makes an appearance," Marcus whispered, studying his opponent through his scope. El Coyote was directing his men with hand signals, already adapting his strategy to the situation. This was no ordinary cartel boss. This was someone who understood tactical warfare. Marcus's radio crackled again. "Whiskey 6. We're seeing multiple thermal signatures converging on your position. Do you need immediate assistance?" "Negative, Sierra 3, Marcus replied, a grim smile crossing his face. El Coyote just brought exactly what I was hoping. 4. A worthy challenge. Stand by for my signal. The real battle was about to begin, and Marcus wouldn't have it any other way. Sometimes it took a predator to truly appreciate the trap they were walking into. El Coyote's reputation hadn't been exaggerated. Within minutes of his arrival, the entire dynamic of the battlefield shifted. The remaining drones adjusted their flight patterns to avoid Marcus's infrared countermeasures, and the assault teams began moving with renewed discipline and purpose. Marcus watched through his thermal scope as El Coyote orchestrated his forces with expert precision. The cartel boss had split his men into 3 teams, one maintaining suppressing fire on the barn, another moving through the cornfield in a complex flanking pattern, and a third setting up what appeared to be heavy weapons at the property's edge. "Not bad," Marcus muttered, genuinely impressed. El Coyote was using classic military tactics, adapted for the terrain. He'd identified the barn as Marcus's strong point and was working to systematically neutralize its advantages. The heavy weapons. Team was setting up belt-fed machine guns. They planned to pin Marcus down while the flanking team worked their way into position. But Marcus hadn't spent 20 years in special forces without learning a few tricks of his own. He keyed his radio twice, activating the second phase of his defense plan. Throughout his property, carefully concealed speakers came to life, broadcasting the sounds of movement and weapons being chambered from multiple locations. To the approaching forces, it would sound like they were walking into a prepared ambush by a much larger force. El Coyote wasn't fooled. His military background would help him recognize the deception. But his men hesitated, their movements becoming more cautious. That hesitation was all Marcus needed. He shifted his position to a secondary firing point he'd prepared on the barn's northern side, perfectly positioned to target the heavy weapons team. Through his scope, Marcus could see El Coyote clearly now. The cartel leader was dressed in practical tactical gear, no flashy cartel decorations or unnecessary equipment. He moved with the smooth efficiency of someone who had spent years in combat situations. Their eyes met briefly through their respective optics. Predator, recognizing predator. Impressive setup. El Coyote's voice came through clearly on a military-grade radio frequency. Of course he'd figured out how to contact Marcus directly. Former Green Beret, I'm guessing. Sniper qualification, probably served in Colombia or Afghanistan. The terrain analysis and preparation speaks of experience. "You've done your homework," Marcus replied, keeping his scope trained on the heavy weapons team. "Former Mexican specialty forces turned your training against your own people. Your reputation precedes you, El Coyote." A dry chuckle came through the radio. "Then you know how this ends. I have 30 men, heavy weapons, and air support on the way. You're good, maybe one of the best I've encountered, but you're still just one man." Marcus allowed himself a small smile. "You're forgetting something crucial. I chose this battlefield. Every inch of this property has been prepared for exactly this scenario. You're not fighting a farmer who got lucky. You're fighting a Green Beret on his home turf." To demonstrate his point, Marcus fired 3 rapid shots. The heavy weapons team's ammunition boxes erupted in small explosions, specialized rounds hitting the stored ammunition at precisely the right points to detonate it safely, but spectacularly. The message was clear. He could have easily killed the men instead. El Coyote's response was immediate and professional. His team shifted positions, adapting to the loss of their heavy weapons support. But Marcus could hear the newfound respect in his voice. "Very impressive. But you're still surrounded, and now you've lost the element of surprise." "Have I?" Marcus asked calmly. He triggered his next surprise, specialized charges he'd planted throughout the cornfield months ago. They detonated simultaneously, creating a wall of fire that cut off the flanking team from their support. The flames weren't lethal, but they created a barrier of heat and smoke that rendered thermal imaging useless. The cartel forces scrambled to regroup, their carefully planned assault falling apart. But El Coyote remained calm. "You can't keep this up forever," he noted. "Every trick you use shows me more of your capabilities. Eventually, you'll run out of surprises." "Maybe," Marcus acknowledged, putting another round through a cartel member's radio, cutting off their communications. "But I've been fighting smarter, more numerous opponents my entire career. That's what Green Berets do. We adapt, we improvise, and we overcome." El Coyote's next words carried a hint of genuine curiosity. "Why fight so hard for this piece of land? The cartel would pay you well for your skills. A man like you could name his price." "Because this is my home," Marcus replied, his voice hardening. "And because men like you need to learn that some lines shouldn't be crossed. You're not the first cartel to push north, and you won't be the last. But after tonight, you'll be an example of why certain targets aren't worth pursuing." The conversation was interrupted by the distinctive sound of approaching helicopters, but not the cartel's air support. These were different, and Marcus recognized the sound pattern instantly. El Coyote heard it too, and for the first time, there was uncertainty in his voice. "Those aren't my birds," he said quietly. "No," Marcus confirmed, allowing himself a grim smile. "They're not. Remember when I said I chose this battlefield? I also chose the timing. Sierra 3 isn't just a tactical team. They're FBI anti-cartel task force, and they're not alone." The sound of approaching helicopters grew louder as multiple Blackhawks appeared on the horizon, their distinctive silhouettes cutting through the smoke-filled sky. El Coyote's forces scrambled for cover, their coordinated assault dissolving into chaos as spotlights from the aircraft illuminated the battlefield. But Marcus knew El Coyote wouldn't go down easily. The cartel leader was already reorganizing his men, directing them to defensive positions with hand signals. This was why he was considered one of the most dangerous men in the cartel world. He remained deadly calm even when everything was falling apart. Impressive planning. El Coyote's voice crackled through the radio, genuine respect evident in his tone. You weren't just defending your farm. You were setting up a trap for our entire northern operation. 20 years in Special Forces teaches you to think bigger than just the immediate threat, Marcus replied, tracking El Coyote through his scope. The cartel leader had taken cover behind his armored SUV, but Marcus could still see him clearly, in thermal. Your mistake wasn't attacking me, it was assuming I'd be fighting alone. The FBI helicopters began circling the property, their spotlights creating a web of illumination that left nowhere to hide. Additional vehicles could be heard approaching on the main road, the full weight of federal law enforcement descending on the scene. But Marcus kept his focus on El Coyote. The cartel leader was too dangerous to be allowed any opening. You know what happens next, Marcus continued, his fingers steady on the trigger. Your men are surrounded, your escape routes are cut off, and every federal agency in the region is closing in. But you're still thinking about options, aren't you? Still calculating the odds of shooting your way out. El Coyote's laugh was cold and professional. You would be too in my position. Men like us don't surrender easily. We're trained to find solutions where others see only defeat. He paused, and Marcus could almost hear him weighing his choices. But we're also trained to recognize when a battle is truly lost. Suddenly, El Coyote stood up from behind his SUV, his hands raised. But Marcus didn't relax. His scope remained fixed on the cartel leader's center mass. He'd seen too many surrenders turn into ambushes during his career. A question before this ends, El Coyote called out, his voice carrying across the battlefield. The farm, the preparations, the FBI cooperation. How long have you been planning this? Marcus allowed himself a grim smile. Since the first cartel tried to move into this valley 6 months ago, I knew eventually someone would test the defenses. I just had to be patient and let you think you were hunting a simple farmer. The FBI helicopters were landing now, disgorging tactical teams that moved with practiced efficiency to secure the perimeter. Marcus could see his old friend leading the operation. Sierra 3 had brought enough manpower to handle even El Coyote's substantial force. Your men have 2 choices, Marcus announced over the radio, knowing all the cartel forces would hear him. Surrender now and face American justice, or resist and deal with me. And remember, I haven't taken a lethal shot all night. That can change in a heartbeat. One by one, the cartel members began emerging from their positions, hands raised. They were hardened criminals, killers all, but they had seen enough tonight to know when they were beaten. Even the best trained fighters had a breaking point, and Marcus had pushed them well past theirs. El Coyote remained standing, his hands still raised, but his eyes were locked on the barn where Marcus held his position. You know they'll send others, he said quietly. The cartel doesn't forget. Neither do I, Marcus replied coldly. And the next group they send will know exactly what happened here. How one retired Green Beret sniper took down the mighty El Coyote and his entire assault force without taking a single life. The story will grow with each telling until this farm becomes legend, a place cartels fear to tread. FBI tactical teams were moving in now, securing the captured cartel members. Sierra 3 himself approached El Coyote, handcuffs ready. Miguel El Coyote Ramirez, he announced formally. You are under arrest for multiple violations of federal law. You have the right to remain silent. Marcus watched through his scope as the legendary cartel leader was taken into custody. The operation had gone exactly as planned. The AT cartel's northern expansion had been stopped cold, their best commander captured, and their reputation shattered. And he had done it all without taking a single life, proving that his Green Beret training was about more than just killing. Dawn was breaking over the Montana hills as the last of the cartel members were loaded into transport vehicles. Marcus finally lowered his rifle, his muscles aching from holding position for so long. The cornfields were trampled, the barn had taken some damage, and his peaceful farming life had been disrupted. But he had protected his home, and more importantly, He had sent a message that would echo through the criminal underworld. Sierra 3 approached the barn, looking up at Marcus's position. "Just like old times, eh?" he called out. "Though you might have mentioned in advance that you were using your farm as bait for a major cartel takedown." Marcus emerged from his sniper's nest, slinging his rifle over his shoulder. "Would you have let me do it if I had told you the whole plan?" "Probably not," Sierra 3 admitted. "But that's why you were always the best Green Beret I ever worked with. You saw opportunities others missed, and you had the patience to let them develop." Marcus surveyed his farm in the growing daylight. He had work to do, fields to replant, buildings to repair, and security to upgrade. But for now, he allowed himself to feel satisfied with the night's work. The cartels had learned an expensive lesson. Sometimes the deadliest predator was the one hiding in plain sight, wearing a farmer's clothes but carrying a warrior's heart. 3 months after the confrontation, Marcus's farm had returned to its usual peaceful state. The corn was growing tall again in the replanted fields, erasing the last visible scars of the battle. But subtle changes marked the landscape. New security cameras disguised as weather stations, reinforced fencing that looked perfectly ordinary to the untrained eye, and even more sophisticated defensive measures hidden beneath the rural facade. The capture of El Coyote had sent shockwaves through the cartel world. The story spread quickly through criminal circles, embellished with each telling, growing into something of an urban legend. The simple Montana farm that had become a trap for one of Mexico's most notorious cartel commanders. The farmer who turned out to be a Green Beret sniper. The night when professional killers learned to fear the dark. Marcus stood on his front porch, sipping coffee and watching the sunrise. His phone buzzed, a text from Sierra 3. "Thought you'd want to know. El Coyote's trial starts next week. He's talking, giving up supply routes, safe houses, everything. Looks like your plan worked better than we hoped." A small smile crossed Marcus's weathered face. The cartel's northern expansion had completely collapsed in the wake of El Coyote's capture. The FBI had seized millions in assets, arrested dozens of associates, and shut down multiple trafficking routes, all because one cartel had made the mistake of threatening the wrong farmer. The local community had changed too. At first his neighbors had been wary after learning his true background, but gradually they came to see him as a protector. The cartel's shadow no longer hung over the valley. Farmers worked their lands, without fear of intimidation. Marcus had given them something precious: security, peace of mind, and the knowledge that someone was watching over them. Ramon and the other captured cartel members had all received lengthy federal sentences. During the trial, Ramon had finally asked the question that had been bothering him since that first confrontation in the cornfield. "You could have killed us all easily. Why didn't you?" "Because death is easy," Marcus had replied. "Living with defeat, that's the harder punishment. Every cartel member in every prison will know your story. How you were outsmarted, outmaneuvered, and captured without a single fatality. That story will do more damage to the cartels than a dozen deaths." The media had tried to dig into Marcus's background after the incident, but his service record remained largely classified. The newspapers settled for calling him the farmer, an unassuming hero who had stood his ground against overwhelming odds. The name stuck, becoming a whispered warning in cartel circles, a reminder that appearances could be deceiving. Sierra 3's tactical team had formally recognized Marcus's contribution to the operation. A quiet ceremony, attended only by fellow operators who understood the true significance of what he had accomplished. The FBI estimated that the intelligence gathered from El Coyote's capture would impact cartel operations for years to come. But Marcus took the most satisfaction in the smaller victories. The local diner owner who no longer jumped at shadows. The teenage kids who could ride their bikes at dusk without their parents worrying. The farmers who worked their fields without looking over their shoulders. He had protected more than just his land. He had defended a way of life. His warning system pinged, alerting him to approaching vehicles. Marcus checked the camera feed on his phone and recognized the familiar trucks. Just local farmers, arriving for their weekly coffee meeting. It had become a tradition since the incident, gathering on his porch to share news and coffee. They never talked directly about that night, but their respect and gratitude were evident in every interaction. As the trucks pulled up to his farm, Marcus reflected on how things had come full circle. He had chosen this quiet life to escape the violence of his past, only to end up using those same skills to protect it. But now the peace felt earned, defended, rather than just found. The first truck parked, and old Bill Henderson stepped out, carrying his usual box of fresh donuts from his wife's kitchen. "Beautiful morning for farming," Bill called out, climbing the porch steps. "Every morning's a beautiful morning for farming," Marcus replied, pouring another cup of coffee for his friend. More trucks arrived, more neighbors gathering on his porch. They talked about crop prices, weather patterns, and local gossip. Normal conversations in a normal farming community, but sometimes, when the talk died down, they would look out over the valley with knowing expressions. This peace had been fought for, had been defended by one of their own. Marcus settled into his porch chair, surrounded by the community he had protected. His rifle was still cleaned and ready in its hidden compartment, his defenses still maintained with military precision. But for now, he was content to be exactly what he appeared to be, a simple farmer, watching his corn grow under the Montana sun. The morning wore on, filled with laughter and conversation. Just another day on just another farm, in just another alley, and if any cartel ever got ideas about moving north again, well, the legend of the farmer would be waiting for them, along with a reminder that some fights aren't worth picking, and some opponents are better left alone. 6 months after El Coyote's capture, Marcus received an unexpected visit from Sierra 3. His old friend arrived unannounced one evening, his government-issue SUV kicking up dust on the long driveway. One look at his face told Marcus this wasn't a social call. "We've got a problem," Sierra 3 said as he climbed out of his vehicle. "El Coyote's brother, Vicente, has taken control of the cartel's northern operations. He's not as tactical as Miguel, but he's twice as vicious, and he's made it personal." Marcus led his friend into the house, his mind already shifting back into operational mode. "Tell me everything," he said, pulling 2 beers from the fridge and setting them on the kitchen table. Sierra 3 pulled out a tablet, displaying surveillance photos. Vicente's different from his brother. Where Miguel was calculated, Vicente is pure rage. He's already killed 3 of his own men for suggesting they avoid your territory. He's coming, Marcus. Not for business, not for territory, for revenge. Marcus studied the photos carefully. Vicente Ramirez looked nothing like his brother. Where El Coyote had been lean and professional, Vicente was built like a bull, his expensive suit barely containing his muscular frame. His face was marked by a perpetual scowl and eyes that burned with barely contained violence. "How soon?" Marcus asked, his voice calm despite the implications. "That's the thing," Sierra 3 leaned forward. "He's not rushing it. He's been gathering specialized equipment, hiring ex-military contractors, building something big. Our sources say he's even brought in demolitions experts from Eastern Europe." Marcus nodded slowly, processing the information. He's learning from his brother's mistakes. No quick strikes, no underestimating the target. He's planning to level the whole farm, isn't he? Most likely. We've intercepted some chatter about heavy weapons being moved north. RPGs, belt-fed machine guns, maybe even some military-grade explosives. He's not taking any chances. Sierra 3 paused, choosing his next words carefully. "We can move you to a safe house. No one would blame you for stepping back from this fight." A small smile crossed Marcus's face as he took a sip of his beer. "You know that's not happening. This is my home. Besides, Vicente's making the same mistake his brother did. He thinks he's the hunter. Marcus, this isn't like last time. Vicente's not trying to intimidate you or take your land. He wants to make an example of you. He'll throw everything he has at this farm." "Good," Marcus replied, standing up and walking to a hidden panel in his living room wall. He pressed a concealed button, and the panel slid aside to reveal a high-tech security station. Multiple monitors displayed thermal imaging of his property, drone feeds, and security camera footage. "Because I've been preparing too." Sierra 3 whistled low as he took in the setup. "This is new. Military grade?" "Better," Marcus said, typing commands into the system. Custom designed. After the last incident, I called in some favors. Remember Johnson from the third group? He's in private security now, developing cutting-edge defense systems. He helped me turn this entire farm into something special. The monitors showed overlapping fields of coverage, with no blind spots anywhere on the property. Hidden sensors monitored everything from ground vibrations to changes in air pressure. The entire defense network could be controlled from this station or remotely through a secure tablet. I've got motion sensors tied to automated deterrent systems, long-range acoustic devices that can incapacitate attackers without killing them, and a few other surprises I'd rather not discuss. Marcus continued. But the real advantage isn't the technology. It's that Vicente thinks he's facing the same setup that caught his brother. Sierra 3 studied the security feeds, his expression thoughtful. You're going to let him come, aren't you? Use his own rage against him. Vicente wants to make an example of me? Marcus's voice hardened. Fine, I'll give him the chance. But when it's over, the cartels won't just have a legend to fear. They'll have a nightmare. Sometimes the best way to prevent violence is to demonstrate the cost of starting it. The sun was setting outside, casting long shadows across Marcus's farm. In those shadows, sensors tracked every movement, cameras recorded every change, and one of the world's most sophisticated security systems stood ready. Vicente Ramirez was coming with an army, but Marcus had turned his entire property into a weapon. I should get back, Sierra 3 said, standing. I'll make sure we have rapid response teams on standby, but... He paused at the door. Try to leave something for us to arrest this time. Marcus smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. No promises. Vicente wants to make this personal? I'll show him just how personal it can get. As Sierra 3's SUV disappeared, down the driveway, Marcus returned to his security station. The monitors bathed his face in a blue glow as he began preparing for what was coming. Vicente Ramirez thought he was preparing for a war, but he was really walking into an ambush, one that had been months in the making. The next 2 weeks were a study in controlled preparation. Marcus used every minute to enhance his defenses, knowing that Vicente's attack was inevitable. His morning routine now included checking the sophisticated sensor network, maintaining his weapons and scanning surveillance feeds for any unusual activity. His farm had become a sophisticated combat operations center, hidden beneath a peaceful agricultural facade. Every irrigation pipe could become a defensive barrier. Each piece of farming equipment concealed tactical equipment or emergency supplies. The old grain silo, reinforced with Kevlar-lined walls, now served as a hardened observation post with commanding views of the surrounding territory. One morning, while checking his security feeds, Marcus noticed unusual traffic patterns on the remote roads leading to his property. Unmarked trucks moving at night, always following different routes but gradually converging on the area. Vicente was positioning his forces, piece by piece, trying to avoid detection. Amateur, Marcus muttered, tracking the vehicles through his thermal imaging system. Vicente might think he was being subtle, but to a trained Green Beret, his movements were as clear as signal flares. Marcus had spent years teaching special forces units how to infiltrate hostile territory. He could spot the signs of an impending operation from miles away. His satellite phone buzzed, a message from one of his old contacts in military intelligence. Thermal signatures showing weapon caches being positioned in abandoned buildings surrounding your property. Heavy stuff. Estimated 30-40 combatants, moving into position. Want me to alert FBI? Marcus typed a quick response. Negative, let them come. Just make sure civilians stay clear of the area. He had planned for this, wanted this. Vicente's obsession with revenge had made him predictable, and predictability was fatal in asymmetric warfare. Later that day, Marcus received another visitor. Johnson, his tech expert friend from the 3rd Special Forces Group. The former Green Beret communications specialist arrived in a battered pickup truck loaded with additional equipment. Latest sensors you requested, Johnson said, unloading hardened cases from his truck. These babies can detect a heartbeat through 2 feet of concrete. Also brought you some new toys the boys in Bragg have been testing. Not strictly legal for civilian use, but... He shrugged. Neither is what Vicente's bringing to the party. Together, They spent hours integrating the new equipment into Marcus's existing security network. Johnson had outdone himself. The new sensors could track individual fighters by their thermal signatures, predict their movements based on terrain analysis, and even identify weapon types by their acoustic profiles. "You know," Johnson said as they worked, "most people would have sold the farm and moved after the first attack. Why stay and risk everything?" Marcus paused, considering the question. "Because some things are worth fighting for. This land, this community. It represents everything I fought to protect during my career. Running away would mean letting the cartels win, letting them spread their poison into another American community." Johnson nodded understanding. "Well, they picked the wrong farmer to mess with. This setup you've got here. It's better than what we had in Afghanistan. Vicente thinks he's bringing the war to you, but he has no idea he's walking into a killing zone." As evening approached, Marcus's sensors detected more movement. Vicente's forces were continuing their buildup, gradually tightening the noose around the farm. They were being thorough, professional, far more sophisticated than the previous attack. But that professionalism would work against them. They were preparing for a direct assault on a fortified position, not realizing that Marcus had turned the entire area into one massive ambush zone. "Range calibration complete," Johnson announced, making final adjustments to the system. "You've got coverage out to 2,000 meters in all directions. Automated countermeasures are online, and the new thermal imaging is tied into your targeting computer. Even their night vision won't help them. You'll see them clear as day." Marcus studied the tactical display, watching the red dots that represented hostile forces moving into position. Vicente had learned from his brother's failure. He was setting up interlocking fields of fire, establishing clear lanes of advance, positioning heavy weapons to suppress any counterattack. It was textbook military doctrine. "He's trying to fight a conventional battle," Marcus observed. "That's his mistake. Green Berets specialize in unconventional warfare. We don't fight fair. We fight to win." Johnson packed up his tools, preparing to leave. "Need me to stick around? I can man the control center while you handle the shooting." Marcus shook his head. "One man fighting from multiple positions is more effective than two men giving away their locations. Besides, this is personal now. Vicente made it that way when he threatened my home." As Johnson's truck disappeared down the dirt road, Marcus began his final preparations. He checked his weapons one last time, ensured his communications equipment was functioning, and reviewed his battle plans. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of crimson. Tomorrow would bring violence to his peaceful valley once again. But this time would be different. This time, Marcus wasn't just defending his farm. He was sending a message that would echo through every cartel organization in North America. Some targets aren't worth the cost. Some enemies are better left alone. And some farmers are more dangerous than any cartel could imagine. The attack began at precisely 3:47 a.m. when Marcus's perimeter sensors detected multiple vehicles approaching from different directions. His security system silently tracked their movements, mapping out their approach vectors on the tactical display. Vicente had chosen the darkest hour before dawn, classic military doctrine for a major offensive. Marcus watched through his thermal imaging as over 30 armed men began their advance. They moved with professional discipline, using proper tactical spacing and maintaining noise discipline. These weren't cartel thugs. These were trained mercenaries, probably ex-military from various special operations units. Vicente had spared no expense in assembling his kill team. "Let's see what you've brought to the party," Marcus muttered, cycling through different sensor feeds. His system identified multiple RPG launchers, belt-fed machine guns, and what appeared to be shaped demolition charges. They weren't just coming to kill him. They planned to obliterate his entire farm, erase it from existence. The first phase of their attack was textbook perfect. Teams of 2 men moved forward to cut his power and phone lines, not realizing that Marcus had buried his actual communications infrastructure 10 feet underground. Other teams established support positions with heavy weapons, setting up interlocking fields of fire that would theoretically prevent any escape. Marcus allowed himself a grim smile. They were executing their plan flawlessly, but it was the wrong plan. They were preparing for a defensive fight against a surrounded enemy. Instead, they were spreading themselves perfectly across his pre-planned killing zones. The tactical display showed their commander, presumably Vicente himself, setting up in a protected position 800 meters from the farmhouse. He was surrounded by what looked like his personal security detail, 6 men with high-end tactical gear. Smart, but not smart enough. "Time to change the rules of engagement," Marcus whispered, activating his first set of countermeasures. Across his property, hidden speakers began broadcasting the sounds of movement, boots on gravel, whispered commands, weapons being loaded. The mercenaries froze, suddenly uncertain about their intelligence. Instead of facing one farmer, they were hearing what sounded like an entire defensive force. Vicente's response was immediate and aggressive. "Push forward," his voice crackled over their radio frequency, which Marcus had easily intercepted. "It's psychological warfare. The target is alone. Maintain the attack plan." But the seeds of doubt had been planted. The mercenaries advanced more cautiously now, their perfect formation starting to show gaps. That's when Marcus triggered his second surprise. Specialized charges hidden throughout his cornfield detonated, creating a complex pattern of explosions that appeared to be defensive fire. The mercenaries scattered for cover, returning fire at enemies that didn't exist. Marcus watched through his thermal imaging as their disciplined advance devolved into chaos. Now they were burning through ammunition, shooting at shadows, while his automated systems recorded their exact positions. "Getting sloppy," Marcus observed as one team of mercenaries bunched up behind a tractor. He activated a focused sonic deterrent, sending waves of disorienting sound at their position. The men stumbled out of cover, their equilibrium shattered, making them easy targets for his non-lethal takedown systems. Vicente was screaming orders now, trying to regain control of the operation. "Push through it! Find him! Burn everything!" His voice had lost its professional edge, rage overtaking tactical sense, just as Marcus had planned. The mercenaries began firing their RPGs at the farmhouse, not realizing it was a hardened structure designed to absorb such attacks. Each explosion illuminated the battlefield, ruining their night vision and creating the perfect backdrop for Marcus's next move. Using the explosions as cover, he activated his mobile drone swarm. Dozens of small, quiet drones emerged from hidden launchers across his property. Each one was equipped with thermal cameras and non-lethal countermeasures. The mercenaries, already rattled, now had to deal with attacks from above. "Boss, we've got drones everywhere," one of the mercenaries shouted over the radio. "This isn't right. He's got military-grade equipment." Vicente's response was filled with fury. "I don't care if he has a tank. Push forward. I want that." Farmer's head. But his men were already breaking. The combination of psychological warfare, disorienting sonic attacks, and the drone swarm had shattered their confidence. What should have been a straightforward assault had turned into a nightmare, and they were fighting an enemy they couldn't even see. Marcus watched it all through his command center, coordinating his automated defenses with the precision of a conductor leading an orchestra of chaos. Each system activated in perfect sequence, hurting the attackers exactly where he wanted them. "Time to introduce myself," Marcus said quietly, picking up his custom rifle. Vicente was still in his original position, now frantically trying to rally his scattered forces. The cartel leader had never left his protected spot, confident in his plan and his superior numbers. That confidence was about to cost him everything. Marcus had allowed this attack to proceed precisely to this point, where Vicente would realize too late that he had led his entire force into the most sophisticated ambush they had ever encountered. Marcus moved silently through his properties. Hidden tunnel system, a network of reinforced passages he'd constructed beneath his farm. While Vicente's forces were being systematically dismantled above ground, he was positioning himself for the killing stroke. His thermal imaging showed Vicente becoming increasingly agitated, barking orders into his radio as his carefully planned assault crumbled around him. "Where is he?" Vicente's voice crackled through the intercepted radio channel. "Find him. I don't care if you have to burn every building to the ground." His professional demeanor had completely dissolved, replaced by raw fury. His personal security detail shifted nervously, watching their leader lose control. Marcus emerged from a concealed exit near his grain silo, 300 meters from Vicente's position. The pre-dawn air was thick with smoke from the RPG impacts, providing additional cover as he moved into position. His rifle's thermal scope cut through the haze, giving him a perfect view of his target. Vicente's security detail was formidable. Ex-Special Forces operators from various countries, equipped with the best tactical gear money could buy. But they were looking outward, expecting an attack from the farm's defensive positions. They never thought to look behind them, where Marcus had allowed them to set up their command post right next to one of his pre-positioned weapons caches. "Time for your lesson in unconventional warfare," Marcus whispered, triggering a series of specialized charges he'd planted months ago. The explosions weren't designed to kill. Instead, they released a dense cloud of CS gas, immediately overwhelming Vicente's security team despite their protective gear. The highly trained mercenaries broke formation, coughing and stumbling, as the military-grade tear gas took effect. Vicente himself fell to his knees, his eyes burning, his tactical expertise forgotten in the face of this invisible assault. That's when Marcus made his move. Moving through the gas cloud with his own protective equipment, Marcus systematically disabled Vicente's security detail. Each takedown was precise, non-lethal, but absolutely incapacitating. He had learned these techniques from the best close-quarters combat instructors in the world, and 20 years of special operations had honed them to perfection. "Impossible," Vicente gasped through his coughing, trying to draw his gold-plated desert eagle. "You're just a farmer. Just one man." Marcus kicked the weapon from Vicente's hand, his voice cold behind his gas mask. "That's where you and your brother both failed. You saw what you wanted to see, a simple farmer. You never stopped to ask why a farmer would have tactical terrain features built into his property, or why his buildings could withstand military-grade explosives. Around them, the sounds of combat were dying down. Marcus's automated defenses had corralled most of Vicente's forces into containment zones, where a combination of sonic weapons and targeted gas deployments had rendered them combat ineffective. The few who tried to retreat found their vehicles disabled by cleverly concealed EMP devices. "You want to know the difference between you and your brother?" Marcus continued, securing Vicente's hands with zip ties. El Coyote understood his mistake at the end. He recognized that he'd walked into a trap set by someone with more experience, more training, and more patience than his entire organization. "But you let rage blind you. You never stopped to think why I let you get this close." Vicente's eyes widened as the truth finally dawned on him. "The buildup, the approach. You knew everything. You let us come in." "Of course I did," Marcus confirmed, "because now every cartel from here to Mexico City will know what happened. How Vicente Ramirez, the butcher, the man who never failed, led his best men into a trap. How one retired. Green Beret turned his entire assault force into a cautionary tale without killing a single person. The first rays of dawn were breaking over the horizon, illuminating the battlefield. Vicente's mercenaries lay scattered across the farm, all alive but thoroughly defeated. The sophisticated weapons they'd brought to level the farm were now evidence that would ensure their lengthy prison sentences. Marcus's radio crackled. Sierra 3's tactical team was approaching right on schedule. They would find everything documented, every action recorded by Marcus's security systems. Vicente's attack would become a case study in how cartel aggression could be defeated by superior training, preparation, and tactical thinking. "You're already famous in our world," Vicente spat, still trying to maintain his dignity despite his defeat. "After El Coyote's capture, every cartel knows about the farmer who used to be a Green Beret." "Good," Marcus replied, watching the FBI vehicles approaching. "Then they'll understand exactly what it means when they learn what happened here. How their best tactical commander, their most brutal enforcer, was defeated by the same farmer. The cartels respect strength, Vicente. After tonight, they'll have a very clear picture of exactly how strong one farmer can be." The morning sun cast long shadows across Marcus's farm as Sierra 3's team began securing the scene. The damage was superficial. Every building had been hardened specifically for this kind of attack. Within a week, there would be little evidence that one of the largest cartel assaults in recent history had been systematically dismantled by a single defender. But the story would spread, growing with each telling. The farmer who had humiliated not one but two cartel commanders. The land that cartels learned to fear. And most importantly, the message that some fights aren't worth starting, no matter how strong you think you are. The days following Vicente's capture brought a flurry of activity to Marcus's farm. FBI evidence teams combed through the battlefield, documenting every aspect of the failed assault. The arsenal they recovered was impressive, enough military-grade weapons and explosives to wage a small war. Each piece would help build the federal case against Vicente and his organization. Sierra 3 personally supervised the operation, ensuring that certain aspects of Marcus's defense systems remained off the official record. Some capabilities were better left undocumented, especially given their technically classified nature. As they walked the perimeter, surveying the aftermath, Sierra 3 shook his head in amazement. "You know," he said, "when you told me about your preparations after the first attack, I thought you were being paranoid. But this," he gestured at the sophisticated network of defenses, "this is beyond anything I've seen outside of military installations." Marcus was checking his defensive positions, already planning improvements. "The cartels made a fundamental mistake in their thinking," he explained. "They saw the first attack as a failure because they underestimated one man. They thought overwhelming force was the answer." "But that played right into your hands," Sierra 3 nodded, understanding. "They brought their strength to your killing ground, fought exactly the way you wanted them to fight." The captured mercenaries were proving to be a valuable intelligence windfall. Many were talking, offering information about cartel operations in exchange for consideration in their sentencing. Vicente's attack had inadvertently compromised dozens of cartel operations across multiple states. Marcus's satellite phone buzzed with a message from Johnson, his tech expert friend. "Cartel chatter is through the roof. They're calling your farm La Tumba, the tomb. Word is spreading fast about what happened to Vicente's assault force." That afternoon, Marcus had another visitor, Bill Henderson, one of his closest neighbors. The older farmer brought his usual box of donuts, but his expression was more serious than usual. "Whole valley's talking about what happened," Bill said, settling into his usual chair on Marcus's porch. "Not just about the attack, but about how you've been protecting all of us. Those cartel boys had plans for every farm in the region. Found maps in their vehicles marking everyone's property." Marcus nodded grimly. Vicente wasn't just after revenge. He was planning to take over the entire valley, use it as a distribution hub. Every farm would have been forced to cooperate or face the consequences. "Well, that ain't happening now," Bill replied with satisfaction. "FBI boys told us Vicente's singing like a bird, giving up everything he knows. Seems getting beaten by one farmer broke something in him, his reputation at least." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of more vehicles, local farmers bringing food, supplies, and offers to help repair the damage to Marcus's property. Word had spread about his role in protecting the valley, and the community was responding with typical rural solidarity. Sarah Chen, who ran the local diner, brought enough food to feed an army. "Least we could do," she said, setting up an impromptu buffet on Marcus's porch. "You saved all our farms, all our families. We didn't even know we were in danger." As the impromptu gathering grew, Marcus received another update from his intelligence contacts. Cartel leadership in Mexico was in upheaval. The capture of both, El Coyote and Vicente, along with the loss of their elite tactical team, had created a power vacuum. More importantly, it had shattered their aura of invincibility. "They're calling you El Granjero Fantasma, the ghost farmer," Johnson texted. "Stories are spreading through their networks about a farmer who can't be killed, who defeats armies without being seen. It's becoming cartel folklore." Marcus allowed himself a small smile at that. Fear and legend were powerful weapons in psychological warfare. Every story that spread would make other cartels think twice about expanding into new territory, about threatening innocent communities. Sierra 3's team finished their evidence collection as evening approached. The last of the captured mercenaries had been transported to federal holding facilities, and Vicente himself was already being interrogated by multiple agencies. But before leaving, Sierra 3 had one last piece of news to share. Intelligence suggests the cartels are establishing a new protocol, he told Marcus quietly. Any operation north of the border has to include an assessment of local residents' backgrounds. They're actually worried about running into more retired Special Forces operators living quiet lives. Good, Marcus replied, surveying his land in the fading light. Let them worry. Let them second-guess every farmer, every rancher, every quiet citizen they think about threatening. Sometimes the best defense is making your enemy afraid to attack in the first place. The sun set over Marcus's farm, casting long shadows across fields that had become legendary in the criminal underworld. His neighbors gathered on his porch, sharing food and stories, united by their brush with danger and their gratitude for having a guardian in their midst. The cartel's attempt to break into their peaceful valley had failed, broken against the will of one man who refused to back down. But Marcus remained vigilant. He knew the cartel world well enough to know that peace had to be maintained through strength and readiness. His defensive systems remained active, his skills sharp, his resolve unbroken. The ghost farmer would continue his watch, protecting not just his land, but an entire way of life that the cartels had threatened to destroy. 1 month after Vicente's defeat, Marcus sat in a secure federal briefing room, surrounded by high-ranking officials from various agencies. The fallout from the cartel's failed attacks had expanded far beyond his quiet valley, reaching into the highest levels of law enforcement and intelligence communities. The intelligence we've gathered from Vicente and his captured men has been invaluable, the FBI director explained, spreading documents across the table. We've identified 37 cartel distribution networks, 19 corrupt officials, and over 50 million in hidden assets. But that's not why we asked you here. Today, Marcus studied the faces around the table, senior officials from the DEA, CIA, and several other agencies he recognized from his Special Forces days. Something bigger was brewing. What you accomplished on your farm has created a unique opportunity, a CIA analyst continued. The cartels are running scared, not just from you personally, but from the idea of you. They're seeing potential threats everywhere, pulling back from territories they used to consider safe. The DEA representative nodded in agreement. Drug shipments across the northern border are down 60%. They're afraid of running into more ghost farmers like you. The psychological impact has been extraordinary. Marcus leaned forward, his tactical mind already seeing where this was heading. You want to weaponize the legend. Exactly, the FBI director confirmed. We want to establish a new program, training retired Special Forces operators to protect vulnerable communities using your methods, non-lethal takedowns, sophisticated defensive systems, psychological warfare, everything you employed against the cartel. The discussion continued for hours, delving into the technical details of Marcus's defensive setup and his tactical approach. They were particularly interested in how he had managed to defeat superior numbers without taking lives, understanding that such methods would be more palatable to civilian communities. The cartels respect strength, Marcus explained, but they fear the unknown even more. What happened at my farm worked because they couldn't understand how one man could defeat their best operators. That uncertainty is more powerful than any weapon. As the meeting concluded, the FBI director made one final request. We'd like you to consider taking an advisory role in this program. Your experience, both as a Green Beret and as someone who's successfully defended against cartel aggression, would be invaluable. Marcus thought about his peaceful farm, about the quiet life he'd built. But he also thought about other communities living under the shadow of cartel violence, about families who needed the same protection he'd provided to his valley. I'll help train your operators, he agreed, but my farm remains my primary responsibility. The legend of the ghost farmer only works if I maintain my cover as a simple farmer who defeated the cartels. Later that evening, back at his farm, Marcus received an encrypted message from one of his old Special Forces contacts now working in Mexico. The impact of Vicente's defeat had reached deep into cartel territory, changing their entire operational doctrine. They're implementing new protocols, the message read. Every potential target must be thoroughly investigated for military backgrounds. They're particularly wary of rural properties with good sightlines or defensive terrain. Your victory has made them paranoid, seeing ghosts in every shadow. Marcus smiled as he read the report. The cartel's own fear was becoming their biggest weakness. Every delayed operation, every abandoned plan, every territory left unexplored because of paranoia about running into another ghost farmer was a victory for law enforcement and civilian communities. His satellite phone buzzed. Another update. From Sierra 3. Vicente's trial date is set. Between his confession and the evidence we recovered, he's looking at multiple life sentences. El Coyote is cooperating too, hoping for leniency. The entire northern operation of their cartel is collapsing. The sun was setting over Marcus's cornfields as he completed his evening security checks. The damage from Vicente's attack had been repaired, his defenses enhanced with new lessons learned from the confrontation. His farm looked peaceful again, giving no hint of the sophisticated warfare capabilities hidden beneath its surface. A truck appeared on his long driveway. Bill Henderson making his usual evening visit with fresh donuts and local news. The older farmer had become a close friend, one of the few people who knew the full truth about Marcus's background and capabilities. "Heard some interesting rumors at the diner today," Bill said as they settled onto the porch. "Stories about other cartels pulling back from the border states, about them being scared of running into more farmers like you. Sarah Chen says even the local gangs are keeping their distance from rural areas now." Marcus nodded, satisfied. The legend was growing, spreading exactly as he had hoped it would. Every story told about the ghost farmer, every rumor about retired special forces operators living quiet lives in rural communities, served to protect those communities more effectively than any number of police patrols or federal operations. "Fear is a powerful weapon," Marcus replied, watching the sunset paint, his fields in golden light. "Sometimes the best way to win a war is to make your enemy afraid to fight it in the first place." 1 year after Vicente's failed assault, Marcus's farm had transformed into something far more significant than just a peaceful homestead. While maintaining its humble appearance, it had become a symbol of resistance against cartel expansion, a legend that continued to grow with each retelling of the story. The morning sun cast long shadows across his cornfields as Marcus completed his usual security sweep. His sophisticated defense network had been further enhanced, incorporating lessons learned from the confrontations with El Coyote and Vicente. But these days, the system rarely detected anything more threatening than deer or curious locals driving by to glimpse the famous farm. His satellite phone buzzed with the weekly update from his intelligence contacts. "Cartel activities in border states down 70% from previous year," the message read. "3 major organizations have completely abandoned expansion plans into rural areas. Your legend continues to grow. They're calling you El Protector now." Marcus allowed himself a small smile as he walked his property. The cartel's fear had evolved into something approaching mythical status. Stories circulated about the ghost farmer who could defeat entire armies without being seen, about hidden warriors protecting America's heartland, about quiet farmers who were more dangerous than any cartel assassin. Sierra 3's tactical team had successfully implemented similar defensive strategies in other vulnerable communities, creating a network of protected zones that the cartels now actively avoided. The FBI's new program, inspired by Marcus's success, had trained dozens of retired special forces operators in his methods. "Your approach is changing the entire dynamic of border security," Sierra 3 had told him during his last visit. "The cartels are so afraid of running into another ghost farmer that they're staying away from rural communities altogether. Your victory wasn't just about defending your farm. It was about showing them that some targets aren't worth the risk." The local community had changed, too. Marcus's neighbors no longer lived in fear of cartel intimidation. Their farms had become something of a safe haven, a region where criminal organizations feared to tread. The local diner had even added a specialty sandwich called the Ghost Farmer. Extra large, packed with hidden ingredients, and according to Sarah Chen, more powerful than it looks. Bill Henderson pulled up in his truck, right on schedule, with his evening visit. But today, he brought news instead of donuts. "Heard from my cousin in Texas," he said as they settled onto the porch. "Cartels tried pushing into farming country down there last week, spotted some fancy SUVs checking out isolated properties. Marcus raised an eyebrow, interested in how the story would end. "Well," Bill continued with a grin, "someone apparently mentioned your name, told them about what happened here. Those SUVs couldn't leave fast enough. Your reputation is better than any security system money could buy." That reputation had become a powerful deterrent. The cartel's own paranoia had created a self-fulfilling prophecy. Their fear of running into more operators like Marcus made them see potential threats everywhere. Every isolated farm became a potential trap, every quiet farmer a possible warrior in disguise. The afternoon brought another visitor, Johnson, arriving with new security upgrades. As they worked on the systems, he shared the latest intelligence from south of the border. "The cartels have actually created a database," Johnson chuckled, showing Marcus his tablet. "They're mapping high-risk zones, rural areas where they suspect retired military operators might be living. The funny thing is, most of these areas don't have anyone like you at all. Their own fear is doing our work for us." Marcus's farm had become more than just his home. It was a symbol of resilience, a reminder that sometimes the most effective defense was making your enemy afraid to attack in the first place. The legend of the ghost farmer had taken on a life of its own, protecting communities far beyond his own valley. As the sun set on another peaceful day, Marcus stood on his porch, surveying his land. The corn was growing tall, his defenses were strong, and his community was safe. The cartels had learned an expensive lesson about underestimating quiet farmers, about the dangers lurking behind peaceful facades. "You know," Bill said thoughtfully, watching the sunset, "I reckon you've done more to protect this country from your front porch than most folks do in a lifetime. The cartels won't forget the lesson you taught them. Sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the one who looks the least threatening." Marcus nodded, satisfied. His quiet war had achieved exactly what he'd hoped, not just protecting his own land, but creating a legend that would continue to defend innocent communities long after the details of his victories had faded into myth. The ghost farmer had become more than just a man. He had become a warning to those who would prey on peaceful communities, a reminder that sometimes the simplest facade concealed the deadliest defender. And as long as that legend endured, as long as cartels feared, the possibility of running into another retired operator living a quiet rural life, communities like his would remain safe. Marcus lifted his coffee cup in a silent toast to the setting sun, to peace maintained through strength, and to the power of making your enemies fear the unknown. The ghost farmer would continue his watch, protecting not just his land, but an idea that sometimes the best victories are won without firing a shot, and the strongest defender is the one your enemies never see coming.